I welcomed my son's fiancée into my family, but then I discovered she had bigger plans. I live in the old quarter of Quebec City above a map shop that smells like old leather and secrets. Most days are quiet. I open around 9, sell a few 18th century sea charts to tourists, maybe a hand-colored atlas to a collector. The rest of the time, I drink bitter coffee and keep to myself. After Charles died 10 years ago, I stopped pretending I needed noise. My son Adrian calls every Sunday. Or used to. He's 32 now, working as a city designer in Montreal, making those clean, gray, lifeless public spaces they call progress. He's always been idealistic, his father's calm with my eye for detail. When he told me he was bringing someone home for the weekend, I said fine. I didn't ask questions. I was just glad he still thought of this place as home. She walked into my shop like she already owned it. Allegra, blonde, delicate wrists. The kind of woman who knows exactly what to say to an older woman to seem respectful without sounding small. She complimented my inventory, admired the way I'd curated the space, then called me so elegant in that rehearsed tone that made my spine twitch. Adrian was glowing next to her, his hand glued to the small of her back like a claim. He looked proud, hopeful. I didn't want to be the bitter old woman who ruins things. So I made tea, set the good cups out, and let her talk. She talked a lot. About how they met at a gallery fundraiser, how she runs her own luxury wedding business, how she's so excited to build a future with someone who has a strong, grounded family. I smiled. I asked a few questions. She gave polished answers. But then I saw the cufflinks. Gold. Enamel. Engraved with the initials C.M. Charles Miret, my late husband's. I hadn't seen them in years, thought they were packed away with his medals and records. She wore one as a brooch, clipped to her silk collar, like an accessory from a dead man's drawer. Oh, she said. When I asked, they were just lying in Adrian's old room. So vintage, right? I said nothing. Adrian looked embarrassed. Said, "Sorry, Mom. I didn't know they were sentimental. I didn't push, not then." But something clicked into place. I've always trusted patterns. In data, in people, in behavior. Allegra's charm had too much polish, too much preparation. I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd studied us, that she wasn't just marrying Adrian, she was targeting him. But I told myself I was being cynical. That grief makes you paranoid. Maybe a woman like that could fall for my son. Still, that night, I locked the cabinet where I keep Charles's watch, and for the first time in years, I checked the insurance paperwork buried beneath the floorboard safe, just in case. The second visit came 2 weeks later. Adrian brought her again, this time with matching overnight bags and a new tone in his voice. Less warmth, more formality, like he was already rehearsing life as a husband and host. Allegra swept into the shop with a bottle of wine and a bouquet of white lilies. She handed them to me like peace offerings for a war I hadn't declared. They stayed for dinner. Over roasted duck and bitter greens, she talked about blending families and letting go of outdated structures. Adrian nodded along like she was reading scripture. When I asked what she meant, she smiled sweetly. "You've held on to this place alone for so long, Madame Miret. Wouldn't it be beautiful to just enjoy your time now, travel? Rest. Let someone else take care of things." I sipped my wine. The shop takes care of me, and I still trust my own hands more than most. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. Adrian did that for her. "Mom," he said gently, "maybe she's right. You work too hard. I mean, we're lucky you're still healthy, but what if something happens?" Allegra placed a manicured hand on his arm. "Exactly. We were actually thinking it might be smart to set up a few things. Power of attorney living will insurance just as a precaution. I know someone who could help. I've seen a lot of families torn apart over last-minute decisions. Whose decisions, I asked. Allegra laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, just general life stuff. Don't worry. I wouldn't touch a thing without your permission. I nodded. Ate my duck. Watching her fork barely graze the plate, but somehow she was always chewing. The next day, Adrian came by alone. He brought forms, light-hearted casual. It's just basic paperwork, Mom. Allegra's friend drafted it. Healthcare proxies, emergency contacts, that sort of thing. I took the packet, flipped through the pages. One had my name printed wrong, Murray spelled with a double L. Another had a section for primary caregiver benefits. I circled it in red. Do you even know what this means? He shrugged. It's just in case something happens. It's not like anyone's trying to steal your oxygen. I didn't sign anything. Later that week, when they left for Montreal, I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I followed the numbers. Adrian had left his laptop open on the shop desk. He used to do that all the time when he was a kid. I never snooped then. I do now. In his recent tabs was a link to their shared wedding planning folder, Project Forever Allegra had called it. Budgets, mood boards, venue contracts, and a spreadsheet labeled Forecast. One column detailed venue costs, another tallied gift expectations. The last column was titled Contingency and Long-Term Payout Planning. I clicked. There was a line item labeled Projected Inheritance EM, a date next to it, October 3rd, and next to that, a sum $420,000 CAD. I stared at the number like it might blink and correct itself, like it might tell me it meant something else. But it didn't. That night, I poured myself a glass of scotch and stared at the reflection in the window. I didn't look scared. I looked tired. And suddenly, very old. They weren't just planning a wedding. They were building a future where I didn't exist. I didn't sleep the night I found the spreadsheet. I lay in bed with my hands folded across my chest like I was already preparing for a casket. The number $420,000 glowed behind my eyes. A tidy sum. Enough to pay off Allegra's business debts. Enough to start a new life somewhere far away. Enough apparently to bury me and still throw a stunning wedding. The next morning, I pulled the folder Adrian left behind from under the counter. He'd called it just backup copies, but the man had never organized a day in his life. He'd always depended on me for that. Inside were 5 documents printed neatly in soft ivory paper. Legal, impersonal, cold. The third form stopped me. It was a life insurance policy. My name sat bold across the top, and just beneath it, a declaration primary beneficiary, Allegra St. James, listed as caregiver non-family. The form was signed. Not by me, but by Adrian. I read it again, then again. He had signed his approval as the next of kin and authorized medical proxy, which gave her full authority if I became incapacitated. There was a medical clause in the fine print. In the event of terminal condition or sudden death, payout will be released within 14 business days. I scanned the submission date. Submitted July 19th. Activation October 3rd, the same date in the spreadsheet. I set the paper down and stared at the antique compass on the shelf, the one Charles used to carry in his coat pocket. He used to say, "Always know where north is, even if everyone else walks south." That night, I opened the saved tab from Adrian's laptop, their shared drive. I dug deeper into the folders past floral budgets and seating charts and found another subfolder named Legacy Planning, hidden under 6 clicks. There it was again, the same figure, the same name, a plan so meticulous, so clinical, it felt less like a wedding and more like a takeover. I printed it all. Then I called Adrian. He answered on the second ring chipper as ever. "Hey, Mom. What's up? I found some papers in the folder you left." A few things confused me. That life insurance policy, for example. Silence. A beat too long. "Oh, that. Yeah." Allegra said it was standard. She's seen it a lot in families where someone's elderly. He backtracked. "I just mean older. It's precautionary. It's not like anything's going to happen. Allegra wanted to make sure you were covered, and she's the one collecting if I die. Only if it's sudden." "Mom, you're being dramatic. This isn't some scheme. She's trying to help. Honestly, you should be grateful someone cares enough to plan." Grateful. I thanked him for his time. Told him I had to close the shop. I hung up before he could call me cold. I sat in silence for a long time, then walked slowly into the back office. Opened the locked drawer, pulled out the manila envelope with Charles's signature still intact across the flap. Inside were the original titles to the building. The safe deed. The one thing no one had asked about yet. Not yet. My son had signed away my life like it was a formality. Not to hurt me, I believed that. But because somewhere deep down he'd started thinking of me as part of the past, that was the moment I knew I wasn't just at risk. I was in the way. The next time Adrian called, his voice was different, measured, clipped, like someone reporting from behind enemy lines. He asked if I was feeling okay. I said I was fine. He didn't ask anything else. When he and Allegra visited the following weekend, I caught the sideways glances, the whispered exchanges. She brought chamomile tea and a bottle of magnesium supplements, left them on the kitchen counter with a note. "Just something to help with aging bones. 3. Adrian barely looked me in the eye. That night, he pulled me aside and said, "I think you're projecting some of your grief onto Allegra. She's not trying to replace Dad, Mom. She's just trying to be part of this family." "She already is," I said. "More than I ever invited her to be." He sighed, frustrated. "You've always had trouble letting people in. Don't sabotage this just because it didn't come in the form you expected." I didn't answer. What I wanted to say would only push him further away. After they left, I called an old colleague from my forensic accounting days. Delphine. She owed me a favor. I asked if she could trace any unusual financial activity tied to Allegra, offshore accounts, name changes, insurance policies filed in other provinces. She said she'd start digging. Then I went to the hardware store and bought 3 motion-sensitive cameras. I installed them in the shop, one above the register, one by the office door, and one tucked inside the grandfather clock across from the reading table. I told myself it was for security, but we both knew it wasn't. It took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of pretending nothing had changed. 2 weeks of Adrian not calling. 2 weeks of Allegra sending cherry texts with photos of centerpieces and dresses. Then one night, the clock camera caught her. She thought I'd stepped out. She stood by the window, holding her phone to her ear. Her voice was quiet, smooth like honey sliding over glass. "She's still here. Yeah, stubborn as ever. I swear once the insurance hits, we relocate. I've already got a place lined up. The old woman's hanging on too long. It's honestly starting to get inconvenient." She laughed. Whoever was on the other end laughed too. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the clip over and over, memorizing the angle of her smile when she said inconvenient. The next morning, I called my doctor's office and asked for a consultation. "Routine," I said. I wanted it written that I was healthy, lucid, and in no need of assisted care. Then I began planning my own little test. The collapse would need to look real fast enough to trigger panic, quiet enough to stay out of the papers. I practiced alone in the back room, timing my breath, learning how to fall without breaking anything. I staged, the space moved a few rugs, and loosened a floorboard. If they wanted a tragedy, I'd give them a rehearsal. Let's see what they'd do when they thought the money was finally coming. The rehearsal dinner was held in a glass-walled event space on the outskirts of Montreal. Polished floors, white tablecloths, everything dipped in champagne tones and curated smiles. I wore navy silk simple pearls and the shoes I always wore when I needed to walk through fire without flinching. They seated me at the end of the head table next to Adrian. He looked tired, older, like something inside him was starting to bend. Allegra flitted from guest to guest like a performer on opening night. She kissed cheeks, refilled glasses, and offered knowing glances to women she'd just met. No one could tell it was all smoke except me. At dessert, I excused myself, stepped outside, stood under the covered garden arch near the ambulance parked just beyond the gate. It wasn't for emergencies, not tonight. Delphine had arranged everything. 10 minutes later, I returned, walked to the table, and dropped. No gasp, no drama. Just a slow collapse like a flower folding in on itself. I hit the floor gently, knees buckling first, then my shoulder, then my head angled just right against the side of a chair. I let my arms fall open, let my breath go shallow, let the panic rise around me. Someone screamed. "Call 911. She's not breathing." Allegra pushed through the crowd with alarming calm. She crouched beside me, smoothed my hair like a nurse in a soap opera. "Pulse is faint," she said to the arriving EMTs. She leaned close, lowered her voice. "If she goes on the way, just take her straight to the morgue. We'll sign everything after." Delphine heard it all. Her phone, patched into the ambulance mic, was recording live. From a parked car across the street, she listened with one hand on the record button and the other already calling her editor. Adrian stood nearby, frozen. His mouth is half open. I watched through barely parted lashes. He looked at me, then at Allegra, then down at the forms she handed the paramedic. He didn't say a word, not when they lifted me onto the stretcher, not when Allegra tucked a blanket around my legs like she cared, not when the EMTs nodded and loaded me in. The ambulance doors closed. Inside, I opened my eyes. The paramedic gave me a look, half pity, half admiration. "You okay?" I nodded. "How long till we loop around? 6 minutes. "Good. Let's make it slow." We pulled away from the venue while Allegra smiled for the cameras, raising a glass to overcoming sudden tragedy with grace. I had seen enough. More than enough. In 6 minutes, I'd be in the hotel suite Delphine booked, with tea, with the file, with the voice recording. This wasn't a collapse. It was a trigger, and I'd just pulled it. They thought it was over. Tomorrow they'd learn I was still breathing and watching. The wedding was held at a vineyard just outside Trois-Rivières. Allegra spared no expense. White orchids flown in from Thailand, a live quartet from Toronto Silk programs on every chair. Even the wind felt hired. Everything was perfect, except me. I wasn't there when the ceremony began. I didn't need to be. Delphine uploaded the clip at exactly 11:57 a.m., 3 minutes before Allegra was set to walk down the aisle. It was short, clean, and lethal. Allegra crouched beside me, brushing my hair back with a gentle hand and whispering to the EMT, "If she goes on the way, just take her to the morgue. We'll sign everything after." The internet eats that kind of cruelty alive. By the time the string quartet played the first note, the video had hit 250,000 views. At 12:04, just as Allegra reached the altar, police in dark suits stepped forward. No sirens, no shouting, just quiet, practiced precision. Allegra, St. James. She blinked. You're under arrest for attempted insurance fraud, false declaration of caregiving authority, and conspiracy to defraud a protected person. Gasps rippled through the chairs. Someone dropped a phone. A child started crying. Allegra stood motionless for a beat too long, then turned to Adrian, as if expecting him to say something. To stop it. To save her. He didn't. Instead, someone handed him a phone. The video was already cued. His hands shook as he watched. First confusion, then horror. I didn't know he tried. She told me it was just precautionary. The officer ignored him. They cuffed. Allegra cleanly stepped back and led her down the aisle she'd rehearsed so many times, only now it was the walk of a woman exiting her own lie. I arrived just after. People turned. Cameras followed me. But I wasn't dressed for the ceremony. I wore black trousers and a wool coat. No pearls. Adrian walked toward me, his face drained of all color. "Mom," he started. "I didn't mean for this, I know. I didn't know what she was really planning. You didn't ask." He looked down, lips trembling. "You gave her the pen," I said. "She just wrote the ending." He broke them. Right there in front of the ruined altar. He dropped to a chair and wept with the quiet of someone who finally understood the weight of silence. I didn't touch him. I didn't offer comfort. Some lessons are meant to scare. Allegra screamed once as they put her in the car. Something about how we were all ungrateful. How she was the victim. No one followed. I stood beside the empty arch of white orchids, watching the aftermath settle like dust after a demolition. They built this day to celebrate a future I was never supposed to see. But I saw it. I watched it all fall apart on schedule on camera and entirely on them. I closed the shop 2 weeks after the wedding. That wasn't. Packed the charts with care, sealed the drawers, locked the safe one last time. The city felt too loud after everything too close. Every customer who lingered too long, every polite smile felt like a question I didn't want to answer. I left Quebec without telling anyone, not even Adrian. Rented a small cabin by Lac Simon, where the fog rolls in slowly and the trees mind their own business. I brought only what mattered: my books, a kettle, Charles's compass, and a single cardboard tube of old drawings. Adrian wrote. 5 letters in the first month. A 6th came later, ink smudged in places like it had been carried through rain. He said he was sorry, that he'd sold his car, emptied the joint accounts, and returned every gift Allegra's company had sent out on their behalf, that he ended the lease on their condo and moved back into a modest apartment, that he couldn't sleep, that he saw my face every time he looked in a mirror and hated the reflection. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only that I was safe. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. But one morning, after the frost had settled along the window panes, I opened the tube of drawings and found the old map he made when he was 8. A treasure map, all crooked rivers and stars with Mom's Island written in red crayon at the center. I hung it above the fireplace. The paper had yellowed, but the ink still held. Maybe that was enough. I survived them both. That's all the closure I need.